Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are back with another edition of our educational speedrun series. So let's jump right into the action with a classic 10-minute rapid game.
Zooming through the game with a bomb cloud start, trashing all your prep like it's modern art. Knight on the rim, he'll still find the win. Chat's going wild, bro thinks he's Hikaru again. Oh hey hey, he's smurfing play by play, beats you blindfolded, still sipping latte. Queens are flying, egos meet defeat, just another speed run on Hikaru Street.
Here we go. First game with the white pieces. So I'm going to play e4. One thing I've noticed at this level still is a lot of players seem to struggle with the development. Many of the games that I'm winning are not reaching a classic middle game with both sides having castles. So it is interesting to note when that will change. So far, it hasn't really occurred. Okay, let's play our classic Scotch opening. This is something that I really advocate for, primarily because it opens up the diagonals, easy development of the knights, and you can castle the king very quickly. Now, there are some pitfalls like bishop c5, which we'll talk about, but my opponent decides to trade the knights. This is a playable line if you know how to do it. You're supposed to go knight to e7, knight to c6, move the bishop and castle the king. 1, 2, 3, and 4. My opponent plays d6, and now I'm going to go knight to c3 here. And thus far, this is a great start. Now, again, we had a game which I think featured this opening before. I'm going to play... I have a couple of options. Now, my king can go either way. I can move this bishop, castle the king. I can move this bishop, castle the king. Now, due to the fact that my opponent is very slow in developing the pieces here, I think I'm going to castle queenside. And the main reason I'm going to do that is because I think that I'm going to be able to put a lot of pressure on this open d file. So let's move the bishop to support castles and to play the move e5 on the next turn. That's my goal. Let's go here. Aim to open this up immediately. Maybe it's a bit of foreshadowing or foretelling, I think is the word, because after I go queen takes e5, my opponent's queen is under pressure and black actually is unable to castle the king. And this is what I just said about 30 seconds ago, which is that at this level it still seems to me that a lot of players struggle to finish their development. I'm winning many games before we reach a classic middle game. So now we see exactly why I castled, because I opened up the center of the board immediately. My opponent a little bit slow with this development. As I said before, I think knight takes d4 is pretty much unacceptable unless you know to move this knight to e7 and c6. We'll talk about it in the analysis after the game, but in general, knight takes knight is, I think, almost unplayable unless you move this knight to e7 and c6. Now we get knight d7. This will hang a pawn. Nothing's guarding. I hit the rook. King can't castle. This is actually very straightforward. This is going to be a relatively quick game. We get bishop to f6. So now we can go rook to e1, checking the king. Black really has no development. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces on their starting squares. This is already game over. I think knight to e5 is maybe the only move here, but I think after knight e5 I can sack the rook, amongst many other options to win the game. Let's see what my opponent chooses to do here. Now, I would point out that I think if you are playing this Scotch opening in this rating range around up to probably like 1200, let's say you're like between 500 and like 1200 or so, I think a lot of people are very likely going to trade the knights, and you will be able to move the knight and the bishop and castle the king very quickly. So I think this opening, if you're going to play Scotch, this game and this specific variation holds a lot of value for players who are in this rating range. Now, if you're a stronger player, I think most people are going to know not to take the knight on d4 generally, but it still could happen as we're seeing in this game. So we get bishop e7. Let's just take the rook. Get knight f8. Now my opponent can try to finish development, so I'd really like to end the game before he develops the bishop, the queen, and the king here. What is the easiest way to do this? Now, there are many moves here, but this bishop, in order for black to castle the king, this bishop needs to come to e6. You need to move the queen and get the king out of dodge. So I'm going to play bishop c4. So if bishop here, I can simply trade the bishops. And as the bishop goes somewhere else, there might even be a knight to d5 here to hit the bishop and the pawn. Pretty much doesn't matter, and all roads should lead to Rome here, but I still want to be a little bit precise. I don't want my opponent to castle the king, because if my opponent could castle the king, imagine that I'm a 1500 player. I know it's probably hard for most people to imagine at home. There are chances to hang a piece. So if my opponent can get this king out of the middle of the board, there are chances that I could blunder and lose the game still if it were to continue. So I'm trying to finish it right away. So let's trade the bishops. Okay, now I could take this pawn, but if I take the pawn, my opponent moves the queen. I can actually double stack. So I think I'm going to play the very calm move, rook to d1, attacking the queen. Now if the queen moves, the king can never castle out of the center of the board. Rook takes e6, of course, was also winning, but I don't want to go for something super flashy here. We got bishop d6. Okay, let's trade the bishops. Extra rook again, so the basic rules apply here of trying to trade down. Let's go knight to e4, attack the pawn. I'm actually not doing the best job of finishing this game. Well, now it's over. My opponent could have pushed the pawn and maybe had some chance to survive for another 5 to 10 moves, but my opponent hangs the pawn, the rook guards the knight. I go here, fossilize the queen with a check on the king, and this is simply GG immediately. So my opponent resigns the game. Now, when we take a look at this game, as I pointed out, I really do like the Scotch opening. If you've been watching all my speedrun videos, this is going to sound repetitive because I've said it before. The reason I really like the Scotch opening is that in general, no matter what opening you play, I feel like it's easiest if you're between, say, beginner, say 0 even, and 1500 or maybe even 2000. The most obvious development of the knights are to these two squares, f3 and c3. Same thing for black. If you can, for example, with black, I do recommend playing e5 because you develop these knights just to set up a basic position. Like, this is a general development you're going to have at this level. You're going to try to bring these two knights out, develop the bishop. It can be e7, c5, doesn't really matter about the bishop, but almost always you want to bring these knights out to these two center squares for either side. Now, moving beyond that basic point, you want to bring the knights out to these two central squares. But what you'll notice, and one of the reasons that I've said that I don't like, say, the Italian game, for example, let's just say we get a position like this, is that it's a very closed position here. Now, you do have the bishop on the diagonal. Both sides do, obviously. You can play something like this, for example, so the bishops get developed easily. But there are really no open files here for the rooks or the queen. Like, the queen doesn't have access anywhere. The queen's very, very passive. Rooks have no open files. They're pawns on all these rows. So you can't really activate the heavy pieces. Now, back to the Scotch. So by playing the Scotch opening here, I know that I'm going to be able to develop this knight to c3, other than one specific variation with bishop c5, and I'm going to be able to develop the bishops, castle the king, and there's also going to be an open file. So let's just say we play some random moves, ignore the evaluation bar, of course, but say you get some random position like this, for example. Now, or actually, I'll put the bishop on c4. Say I put the bishop on c4, just something like this, d6, rook e1, castles, bishop g5. What you'll notice here is that the rook is on a file that can open very soon. Say I play knight d5 down the road, just to illustrate the point. The e file can open. Additionally, here I can also play rook to d1, and just to illustrate the point, I can also open up the d file for the queen and the rook. So I get the same kind of development by bringing out the bishops. I get the knights on these squares, but most importantly, the heavy pieces have very clear-cut squares that they belong on in the center of the board, like d1 and e1 for the rooks, with the queen on d2. Now, of course, I played this about as badly as I could from the black side, but it's not so much about the specific moves. It's about understanding the reason that I really recommend this opening. Now, those of you guys are going to probably point out black can go bishop c5 if you're a stronger player here, where white has to play like c3 and bishop e3. This is pretty advanced theory, so I'm not going to get into the weeds, but nonetheless, you can develop the bishop, castle the king, bring a knight to d2 or a3, and it goes on. But I really do like this opening because, especially at this level, I would say below 2000, most people are not going to play this bishop c5 line. If they do, of course, you need to know to play c3 and bishop e3 to reinforce the knight. But in general, I think you're going to get a very easy game, which is really all that matters at this level. So my opponent traded the knights. Now, when my opponent trades the knights here, I actually faced this opening, I think, when I was already close to grandmaster level, because in the late 1990s, early 2000s, this was considered to be okay for black after knight to e7. The reason is that after knight c3, black can go knight c6, attacking the queen. Very important to note that if black ever moves the bishop, you hang the pawn. So that's why black can bring the knight out very quickly to c6, and when you move the queen to, say, d3, black can go bishop c5 or bishop to e7 and castle the king. Now, you'll notice, of course, according to the eval bar, that white is much better. But as I've stressed before in many of these videos, my goal here is to explain this for the players who are, say, between 0 and 1500. As I keep improving the level, of course, we'll start to talk about more advanced things. But in general, the most important thing is to get a game. The evaluation bar does not matter. The key is survive the opening, get to the middle game. That's all that really matters, and that's all that you should be aiming to achieve at these levels. So if black gets like bishop e7, yes, if someone's a very strong player like me, they'll find queen g3, knight d5, bishop h6, and as you can tell, white is much better according to the eval bar. Would someone at 1500 ever play this? Absolutely not. And you're going to get your development from the black side, say bishop e3, let's just say castles, d6, you can bring the bishops out, and you get to play a middle game where either side has potential to either play well or make some mistakes. Okay, so we got d6 in this game. I played knight c3, and now I played bishop to f4. And as we saw immediately, the reason that I went for this queenside castle is that with the pawn on d6, I knew that I would be able to blast open the center before my opponent could complete the development. So we get this, it's game over. If black goes bishop d7 here, probably the best move is to simply trade the queens with the extra pawn. You could also play something like bishop to c4 to try to target both of the diagonals here. This also has a lot of merit to it as well. Now, after we got knight to d7, I take the pawn, and frankly, at this point, I think the game is pretty much over. Knight to e5 would have been a better try, but white can sack the rook. If black takes, you take back, hitting the king and the rook. If king d7, you have check, and then you have rook to d1, checkmating the black king in the center of the board. Okay, so after bishop e7, I take, and the rest is pretty straightforward here. So let's move on to our next game. Here we go. So our next game, now we're playing with the black pieces here. So we get knight to f3, and now I'm going to play the move knight to f6. We get d3. I think I'm going to play d5 here. Main reason being that I stop white from playing e4, at least temporarily. Let's go bishop to f5, stopping e4. I guard it with the pawn, the bishop, and the knight. 3 pieces covering the square for two white pieces. So we get to move c3, and now I'm going to play the move e6, just being, or actually, yeah, let's play e6 being very, very standard. There is one trick here that my opponent could try to play, which is e4. I'll explain after the game. We get queen c2. Let's go h6 here. So if white ever goes knight to h4, I can drop this bishop back. Let's drop the bishop back. Keep a spy on the diagonal. Okay, let's just develop. Castle the king. Okay, let's castle here. Okay, so now we get to move pawn to a4. Now, after white plays a4, I really want to figure out how to try to open up the center of the board or develop the queenside pieces. Now, I will give my opponent a big thumbs up. Even though black is probably better here, my opponent has survived. My opponent has played a very simple position, developing the pieces, getting the king out of the middle of the board, and I really approved. Now, I'm going to go c5. And the reason I'm going to go c5 here is that I might want to play c4 to try and chip away at this pawn structure with the bishop on the diagonal. Also, by playing c5, I stop white from ever being able to build a big white center here. So now we got to move pawn to e5. Now, when I play knight d7 here, I intend to pressure this pawn twice, but also white can never play d4. Of course, it would hang the queen, but even so, if white ever goes d4, aside from the fact that the queen is hanging, I can always play knight c6 and really try to put pressure on the center, where say I had put a knight out here, knight here, white pushes the pawns, the center would have been very connected. I'll explain in the analysis afterwards because it might be hard to visualize. So now we get queen b3. Okay, let's go knight c6, hit this pawn twice. If white takes, I'll simply take this pawn on e5, I think. Actually, oh wait, never mind. I actually have, oh wow, I've got a beautiful tactic here. It's very, very unusual. I just spotted I can actually go knight to a5 here, and the queen can't go back because the knight covers the square. My queen guards the rook and the knight, and when the queen goes here, I have a6 to trap the queen. Oh, this is actually beautiful. I didn't see it right away, but luckily as soon as my opponent took, I didn't instantly grab the pawn. And this is also why you have to be careful. If your opponent hangs up, if you bring a queen out to the queen side very early from the white side or the black side, be very careful if there's a pawn that's hanging, because oftentimes when you grab that pawn, your queen can sometimes become a huge target, if not get outright trapped like we're about to see in this game. So my opponent plays knight b3. This just hangs the queen. I think my opponent will resign. I'll obviously explain this afterwards. There isn't really much to this game to add, but all right, let's go back to the start. So from the start, there were two things. First of all, when I bring the bishop out, I really like this setup because this is basically like playing the reversed London system from the black side. It's very easy to play here. Now I played e6 here. Probably I should have played h6 right away to drop the bishop back, because after e6, white could have possibly played the move e4, I think, because if I were to take here, oh, I thought this was losing. Oh, I'm blind. After takes, I can trade the queens and win the game. The line that I saw was takes, and queen to a4 check, hitting the king and the knight with the classic 90-degree right triangle. But actually it doesn't work, because when I take, if white goes queen a4 check, I can drop the bishop hitting the queen. And as I just mentioned, if knight takes, I trade the queens first, take, and now black simply has one extra pawn in the middle. All right, so back to the game. So now I play e6, I play h6. It's very easy because the main thing in the London system, which I've mentioned, or I'm regurgitating, I guess, if you've already heard it, is that when you play the London system, one of the biggest things you want to be careful of from the white side is that your opponent can never bring a knight out to hit this bishop. Now, without h6, white could have played knight to h4 here, but I can play bishop g4, bishop h5, and it becomes very complex. Maybe that's why h6 is perhaps slightly better, so that on this move I can just drop the bishop back right away and keep the bishop on this nice diagonal. But anyway, I played e6, then I go h6, we get e4. Okay, we develop here, castles, and now I played c5. If I had played knight c6, now of course we'll disregard the fact that a queen is hanging here for a second, but if white can get this structure with this pawn chain connecting 4, let's just say I play a move like this just to illustrate the point here. If white gets this chain of 4 in this position, white is actually doing very, very well here. Even if black tries to play something like f6, there's always an f4, and even if you get let's just say something like this, for example, f6 and bishop to f1, you have a lot of pressure on this pawn on e6 here, and this pawn structure is very favorable for white, primarily because this pawn on d4 cannot be targeted. It's just permanently guarded by this pawn on c3. You have no way to really chip away at this pawn, so if white can get the structure, white's doing very well. Now, I don't necessarily expect players to be able to implement this in their game yet, but the main point is that when you see these structures, and your brain subconsciously should be putting 2 and 2 together when you watch these videos. Doesn't mean you'll be able to apply it in a way that you can like explain this, and this, but the more you see these patterns, the better you're going to be at recognizing them. So I played c5 here because now if white goes to e5, again, we'll disregard that the queen is hanging here. In this position, when you get the structure, you'll notice here that all these pawns are under a lot of pressure. So even this, for example, is potentially very good because now the pawn on d4 is a little bit weak. If we go back to this position, I guess like right here, like even if I get this position, the pawn can never really be targeted. This pawn on c3 just guards it. So unless you can push a pawn here and target, or this one and target this pawn is just permanently protected, and white has a better pawn structure. So now back to the game. If we get back to this line that I was just mentioning here, like you'll notice yeah, this position, now the pawn is under pressure because there's no pawn on c3 guarding it. So white has to play something like knight b3, and black can even go e5 here, just opening up the center of the board. Actually, I don't know why I drew that arrow, opening up the center of the board. You can also play something like queen b6 potentially to hit the pawn on d4. White has to go bishop e3, and after queen b4, there's pressure on the knight and the pawn. The game goes on. It's not like this is winning or anything, but in general, structurally speaking, this pawn is much weaker when it's a standalone pawn versus being part of a connect 3 pawn chain. Okay, so back to the game. I play knight c6. Now this is very dangerous. One thing that you'll see in many openings is a position like this where there's a knight a5 idea to trap the queen. Queen can't go anywhere. This is very common. This pattern in this game is very rare. I don't feel like I see this very often, because after knight to a5, if white goes queen b5, there's a6. My queen guards both of these knights. The rook guards the pawn. If you take, I take. Queen has no squares available. Any square the queen goes to, the queen gets captured, so it's trapped. If white goes queen a6, which is the best try, you have knight b8, and then again, same thing with a6 here. Queen guards the knight, bishop guards the pawn. This queen is simply stuck. There are really no good squares available for the queen, and black will win the game. Now, a good example of an opening, just to set this up, that could occur is something like, let's say, some position like this, for example, where you get like e6, knight c3, knight 6, something like this. It's a little bit off because it's not this exact position, but there are many cases where white will bring the queen out and try to hit the pawn, and after a6, for example, when white takes, there's knight to a5 trapping the queen like this. This is very common. You'll also see it in openings like the Sicilian knight, or for example, if you try to play this crazy poison pawn variation with e6, f4, queen b6, and here white can also play a3 in this position, and after takes, knight a4, it's spaghetti time. Your queen gets trapped on b2 and you lose the game. All right, so let's move on to the next game. Here we go. We're gonna get the white pieces, and I am going to play the move pawn to e4 here. We get a Sicilian. Let's play knight to f3, and let's play something. What do I want to play here? This is a very unusual opening. I don't think many people will play this O'Kelly variation. What? Well, okay, the guy's trying to ruin my video. Congratulations. Okay, let's move to the next game. Let's play e4. You get e5. Let's go knight to f3. You get d6. And now let's again play our classic Scotch setup by playing d4 to try and open up the center of the board. Now we get the move bishop c4, and this is actually funny because this is leading to a very, very famous game that was played between Paul Morphy and the Duke of Brunswick. I take this bishop. This is already, I think, very close to losing for blacks. I hit the pawn on f7, and now I go queen to b3, hitting both pawns at the same time. This is a classic 90-degree right triangle. This, of course, is what is known as the famous opera game. I'm pretty sure I've done a video on this game. I think almost everybody has. It was played between Paul Morphy, the unofficial first world chess champion and the Duke of Brunswick. It's called the Opera Game because I believe this game is played at an opera house. There was an opera being shown or something, and the players played the game there, if I'm not mistaken, from a historical standpoint. So it's something that's very, very well known. Both the pawns are under attack on b7 and f7. Now, what's funny about this is I feel like my opponent doesn't actually know this opening. And I feel like if you're actually like 1300, you should know this game. I wouldn't say by heart or anything, but you should be aware of this game because it's a very, very famous historical game. Right out of the opening, white is actually winning in this position. Okay, we got to move bishop to d6. I'm obviously going to take f7. I'm not going to take b7 because I could take, but if I take, black moves the knight and black will be able to castle the king. But when I take this one, now black no longer has a chance to castle the king. I think I'm just going to drop my bishop back. The king, this is a bomb clouded king stuck in the middle of the board. It's not really doing anything here. Black's going to struggle. I think I also have like bishop g5. Now let's just go here. Knight c3 castles very, very quickly, trying to checkmate this king. Okay, let's move the queen away. Don't hang the queen. I also still want to guard this pawn. I'm probably going to play c3 or knight c3. I'm not sure which one. c3 is value to kick this annoying pony that's kind of in the middle of the board here with some pressure. So I could go c3. But my instinct here is that I don't think I'm actually super worried about this knight. So I think I'm going to go knight c3, try to castle, try to attack immediately here. Because with this king stuck in the center, I don't really see an easy way for black to attack. Now, maybe there's c6 here to stop knight d5, followed by b5. Okay, let's go check. Can't take the pin. Okay, let's just take. Why not? Now, my opponent's probably going to try to get this king out of the center. Let's kick the knight. So I really want to keep an eye on this king. This king gets to safety. Yes, I'm positionally winning, but the game is going to go on for a long time. So I'm going to try to attack this king. And the obvious square that I see to hit this queen before it can escape is this h3 square. So that's like very clearly on my mind in terms of where I want to go. I think, yeah, I'm going to go queen h3 to hit the king before this king can run to safety. If f5, I think I just take the pawn. If king to e8, I don't see a forced checkmate. I feel like there's a check. Yeah, I think I'm going to go check here. Hitting the king. There are two ways to block, bishop or knight. If you block with the queen, I take the queen. If the bishop goes, I think I will castle. Knight goes. The king has moved. Yeah, the king's moved, so black can no longer castle the king. So I think I'm just going to simply castle my king here. Try to put pressure on both of these pawns with the knight and the rook coming into the game. So we get queen d7. Now I'm going to take this pawn here. Remember, the king has already moved, so black cannot castle this king. So my opponent will take. Without castles being a move, since black already moved the king up, over, and back. I think it was 1, 2, 3, if I'm not mistaken. You can't castle the king, so now there are a ton of checkmating ideas here on both of these squares. Okay, so we get the win. So back to basics. This opening, if white plays d4, this is what's called a Philidor defense. In this position from this move order, usually black, I believe, is supposed to play the move knight to d7, or simply take the pawn on d4. After takes, you take with the knight. Very, very easy development. Put the bishop on c4, e2, something like this. Bishop to e7 here. And white can play bishop f4 with the idea of playing something like queen d2 and castling queenside. You can also play something very simple like g3, bishop g2 and castles. You can also play something like, I think, bishop to e2 and just castle as well. Very straightforward development to reach a middle game. Not a whole lot changed. White probably puts the bishop on f4 to try and open up this diagonal down the road. You can also put the bishop on e3 as well. But this is a middle game. The show goes on. It's not necessarily winning for white, so this is probably the best way for black to play. Although, again, white does have a slight advantage out of this opening. Bishop g4, however, I believe is just known to be a bad line, because after takes, bishop c4, queen b3. As I mentioned, this, of course, is the classic position from the game between Paul Morphy, the first unofficial world champion from the United States, and the Duke of Brunswick, the Opera Game. I believe the Opera Game continued with queen to e7, and Morphy did not take this pawn here because I think he didn't want this end game, even though white is up a pawn here and doing well. So Morphy played the move knight to c3. We got c6 stopping knight d5, bishop g5, b5. I believe it was takes, castles. I think it was rook d8, takes, rook d1, queen e6, takes, and then queen b8. Knight takes b8, and the move rook to d8, simply checkmating the black king in the center. Now, after queen b3, this position already is basically lost because both these pawns are under attack, and there is no way for black to guard both pawns, so it's already pretty much resignable. We get bishop d6. I bring the bishop back, queen d3, knight c3, check here, and Yeah, there isn't really a whole lot to add, because if black could castle, I guess even castles, even if it were possible, there would be bishop to e6 winning the queen anyway, so it wouldn't matter. But at this point, there isn't really much to be said since black can't castle the king. All right, so let's do one more game. This time we get the black pieces. Let's play knight to f6, c4, and let's play e6 and d5 here. Now, I think this is one of the best general setups to play, as this queen's gambit declined from the black side. We get c5, which it's dubious, but actually I would point out this is something you really need to know what to do if your opponent tries to play this move, because white can try to build a big white center immediately. Now I'm going to play the move b6 here, trying to chip away at this pawn structure.